There's no denying that the UFC have the bulk share of talent in the sport of MMA, but are there champions in other promotions that could stake a claim at being the best in the world? Well, given that Bellator and PFL have recently announced their merger, let's take a closer look and find out. For the women's divisions, I'm just going to breeze over them as I didn't see them as overly competitive, given that a lot of these organizations don't actually have every weight class from 115 pounds up to 145. Stamp Fairtex in one championship is a highly skilled and incredibly violent fighter, but she's no match for Zhang Weili as a strawweight. Alexa Grasso is a superior fighter to Bellator's Liz Carmouche, and while the Bantamweight title in the UFC is currently vacant, it's also the only other major title up for grabs outside of Invicta at that weight. And I'd have to say that Mayra Bueno Silva, who I believe will win the belt, is probably the best on the planet right now. From there, giving Chris Cyborg in Bellator and Kayla Harrison in PFL the women's featherweight and lightweight #1 spots, it's pretty straightforward. Now, I will mention at this point that we're going off the traditional titles for each division. So One Championship's flyweight division, with their weird and not overly transparent weight cutting rules, has the natural strawweight Jared Brooks as a 125-pound fighter, the flyweight Demetrius Johnson as a 135-pound fighter, and has career bantamweights like John Lineker fighting at 145 pounds. I'm just going to step everything back a division because, let's be real, that's who they should be compared to for the purposes of this video. The flyweight division comes in first on the men's side of things, and at the very top level, it's a division that has undergone a major boost in popularity in the UFC after the departure of its longtime champion Demetrius Johnson and his eventual conqueror Henry Cejudo. Guys like Brandon Moreno, Davison Figueiredo, and the current UFC champ Alexander Pantoja have done a great job at establishing themselves in the eyes of the fans, allowing this once forgotten division to move into a new era. But is there an argument to be made that Mighty Mouse is still the best on the planet? Well, I certainly think so, especially with Pantoja sitting at the top of the UFC's division. Pantoja is an excellent fighter, don't get me wrong, but I think he falls short of DJ in key areas, and we're still seeing Johnson carving out incredible success in one championship. Outside of the UFC and the PFL, there is a surprising lack of 125-pound representation, with many promotions opting out of the flyweight business entirely. It might be a controversial pick, but I'm going to go with the tried and tested Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson as the best fighter in the sport, even now. Okay, so with the Bantamweight division, we come to the first truly fleshed out competitive field, although the PFL don't actually run a 135-pound tournament. The obvious two names here are Sean O'Malley within the UFC and Patchy Mix in Bellator. I mean, I will give a mention to Juan Archuleta for his recent form in Ryzen, but this is a two-horse race. We just saw Mix deal with Sergio Pettis to take home his first slice of championship glory, and with the merger between Bellator and the PFL incoming, I see Mix as a very important figure for this combined company moving forward. That said, despite the fact that I would put Patchy in the top 6 or 7 in the world already, Sean O'Malley is the best bantamweight on the planet right now. Although Merab Dvalishvili is a horrible matchup on paper, and could well prove himself before all is said and done, but I do feel that the MMA fanbase underrate just how good O'Malley is, and how good he proved himself to be by going head-to-head with a great fighter like Petr Yan in what was a competitive fight, and then by finishing Aljamain Sterling, just as he was on the verge of legitimizing himself and perhaps even pushing into the GOAT conversation. O'Malley is the best champion in the sport right now at 135 pounds, although the Merab question is one that certainly needs an answer in 2024, if Sean can get past Chito Vera, which I'm confident he can. Featherweight is a far less competitive bracket, not due to any lack of talent outside of the UFC, but more so because of the fact that Alexander Volkanovski is just that good. I don't need to spend too much time on this one. There are a few excellent fighters operating out there, the aging Patrizio Pitbull being right at the top of the list. But there's no featherweight on the planet right now who comes close to Volkanovski in terms of technical skill, resume, and standing within the divisional GOAT conversation. This fight against Ilia Topuria will be an interesting one, of that there is little doubt, but you can't put anyone on Volk's level right now. It's an easy pick, so let's just move on. Lightweight is a similarly easy one. Islam Makhachev is not only the greatest lightweight fighter in the sport today, but there's an argument to be made that he's the best MMA fighter in the game, period. And it's a claim that I agree with personally. Lightweight is always going to be a high quality division given how it takes in the largest number of applicants globally based on the average male size. And right now, Islam is at the head of the pack. That's not to discredit very good fighters like Usman Nurmagomedov, Roberto Satoshi, anyone on the PFL roster, you know, guys like Olivier Aubin-Mercier, Shane Burgos or Clay Collard, or even the one championship king Christian Lee, who is their pumped up 155-pound champion at 170, who also recently claimed their welterweight or 185-pound title, which I know is very confusing. But Either way, Islam Makhachev is definitely the man right now at lightweight. So again, let's move on. On a quick side note, if you're enjoying this content, be sure to let us know in the comments section below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the like button if the mood strikes. Anyway, back to the video. Up next is welterweight, which, depending on how you look at it, would have been a relatively interesting one if I'd made this video a few weeks back. Over in Bellator, the unbeaten Yaroslav Amosov was recently dethroned by Jason Jackson. And while I always did like Amosov, I always thought that he was a bit overrated. Sure, his 27-0 record looked nice on paper, but numbers like that can be deceiving. Jason Jackson is quite a good fighter who does seem to be tying it all together pretty well on this current run. He has beaten some good, albeit aging big names, but I think he's a runner-up to the obvious pick here. Leon Edwards is the best welterweight on the planet until one of his fellow contenders in the UFC proves otherwise. I actually still think that he's somewhat underrated by the masses and has been for years. Those Kamaru Usman victories, in particular his second win over him in the trilogy, by decision, are as good as any performance any welterweight fighter has had against a high-level opponent. And yeah, I'm not going to bring Christian Lee into this conversation despite his one championship double champ status. I don't think he's on Leon's level. The same can be said for anyone in the PFL like Sadibou or Magomed Karamov. They're just not beating the type of competition that Leon has. Things get very interesting from this point onwards though, because the UFC do have a bit of a drop-off in quality when you get to middleweight and above. Sean Strickland managed to put on one insanely good performance against Israel Adesanya last time around, but the middleweight race is a bit of a toss-up. I could argue that Adesanya is still the best middleweight on the planet, although I'm not 100% sure. Dricus du Plessis is in this conversation as well, but as far as champions go, the primary competition comes in the form of Johnny Eblen in Bellator, who is carving out a pretty impressive legacy atop their middleweight pile. There are a few other standouts, but it is Strickland versus Eblen in my book. There are two different ways to look at this. Who has the better resume, and who would actually win in a fight? Because I think Eblen might get my pick in a head-to-head in the cage, but that's probably just because I've seen Strickland lose many times in the past. And if there's one thing that has been made crystal clear in recent times, it's that he's a different fighter now. And that win over Adesanya is a better victory than anything Johnny Eblen has. So I will go with Sean Strickland for now, but this one was very close. The newly crowned UFC light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira is a fighter that I hope can bring some much needed stability to the division. And not even necessarily as a long-time champion, although that would be cool, but more so in terms of just defending the belt and not getting injured like the last two champions. But there is some interesting competition for Poatan in other organizations. Although I'll preface this by saying I haven't a clue what's up with the PFL right now. There's a bunch of PED suspensions, including Rob Wilkinson, who seem to be pulling ahead of the competition, as well as shoeface Antonio Carlos Jr., who's away from the sport because he's on the Brazilian version of Big Brother. But anyway, it's Bellator's Vadim Nemkov who's the runner-up here. This guy is a very, very good fighter, and without even thinking about the matchups too much, I think he would slip into the UFC's top 5 quite comfortably. But I also like one championship's quote-unquote cruiserweight champion, Anatoly Malakin. He's not beating Nemkov or Pereira in this bracket in terms of resume, but he's definitely worth his mention. And for as much as I do think Nemkov is a superb fighter, and maybe the most competitive Bellator champion on here, along with Johnny Eblen, I'm going to stick with Poatan. He has the resume, he has the insane technical stand-up skills, and 4 victories over former, current, or future UFC champions. And finally, we come to the biggest mess of them all, the heavyweight division. And with all due respect to Anatoly Malakin, Ryan Bader, and any other heavyweights out there who are worthy of a mention, this is a 3-horse race. And I'm not going to play by my own rules here, I'm actually going to have this conversation as the MMA gods intended. Because the reason that I decided to make this video was because of this discussion. Firstly, you have the undisputed champion in the UFC, Jon Jones, a man who seems determined to fight once more without unifying the title that was won by the promotion's interim champion, thus bringing stability to the division. And at this stage, I mean, I suppose who can argue with him? Jones, based on what we've seen inside the cage, is the best mixed martial artist that I've ever witnessed. A fighter so good that the only in-cage criticisms of him stem from narrow decisions that just, could have gone the other way. And then when I'm talking about not playing by my own rules, we're going to talk about the UFC interim champion Tom Aspinall, who, it could be said, has done more for the division in terms of beating top contenders than the undisputed champion. And in many ways, a lot of fans see him as the undisputed champion in waiting, and I kind of agree. And then on top of that, again, not playing by the rules, you have Francis Ngannou. And I know he's not a champion in PFL and is not likely to return to MMA anytime soon, but I just can't have this discussion without bringing him into it, because when last seen in an MMA cage, that was the best heavyweight on the planet, maybe the best ever. He's the guy with the best resume in the division and a skill set that was improving rapidly. He's also not technically retired, although for all intents and purposes he's a boxer now. So do the UFC actually have the best heavyweight fighter on the planet? Well, I think Ngannou was, and to some degree still is, the finest example of a heavyweight in the sport. But for as much as I'm putting him in this conversation, can I really put him above the two champions the UFC have? Maybe, maybe not. But I also think that Tom Aspinall has an argument for the #1 spot, just as John Jones deserves full credit for walking through Cyril Gane like he wasn't even there. It's a tough one, guys, and I'd love to hear your own opinions in the comment section below. Who are the top 5 heavyweights on the planet right now? Include Francis or not at your own discretion. But for me, I think Ngannou, while he's not technically retired, has to get the top spot based on his skills and his resume, but he's also not a champion, so it's a bit messy. The safe pick here is John Jones, but he only has one fight in the division, and I could just as easily say Tom Aspinall. So yeah, I'm definitely kind of stumped on the question of who the best heavyweight in the world is. It's a unique situation, and I don't think there's going to be a correct answer that's going to satisfy every criteria. But yes, among active heavyweight champions in MMA, the UFC definitely has the best of the best. But how do you think we did with our picks? Do let us know in the comment section below, and if you want to like the video and subscribe, that would be awesome. As always, thank you for watching.